Welcome to the third and final episode of our Sex Ed and Christian School series. This is the last one, we promise.
The Christian Principles Podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. But bear in mind, the views and opinions expressed here are those of the hosts and not necessarily of the Herzog Foundation.
Welcome to the Christian Principles Podcast. I'm Matt George.
And I'm Mark Zockoll, and you'll never know this unless we just keep it all in there, but that intro took us several tries. Some were quite embarrassing. But
yeah, I'm still wiping water from my eyes.
We are on the third part of this Sex Education and Christian School series. In the first part, we set the table and we begged you to stick around and listen to us. In the second part, we further set the table with some reasons why, some reasons why not. And in both and here, we fully affirm that various Christian schools will have various methods of dealing with this. We're starting the conversation as we would have appreciated others starting with us as young Christian school administrators. So before we get to the actual conversation, let's go ahead and hear from the Herzog Foundation, our partner in this venture, and one we are so grateful for.
Are you ready to take your school's mission to the next level? This summer, the Herzog Foundation Institute invites Christian school administrators like you to join the transformative workshops designed to equip, inspire, and empower you for the coming school year. Why should you attend? Learn from top Christian education leaders, network with passionate peers from across the nation, gain practical strategies to strengthen your school's impact. Workshop locations vary throughout the year, but this summer and specifically in the month of July, you can find workshops in Dallas, Texas, Nashville, Tennessee, Kansas City, Missouri. Spots are limited and filling fast. Visit herzogfoundation.com/institute to view workshop details and secure your seat today. Remember, it's free. Just get yourself there. Don't miss this opportunity to renew your vision, sharpen your skills, and lead your school with confidence. The future of Christian education starts with you. Sign up for a Herzog Foundation Institute summer workshop now.
Okay, so if we're thinking about the first episode, Matt, what sticks out to you as what you remember from that first episode, though our listeners will only have this a couple days from it?
Yeah. It's one of the beauty, like the magical things of podcasting, right? Like for the listener, we just had these conversations for the past 2 days. For you and I, though, we thought it would be a great idea to spread this conversation out through like 2 weeks or something like that. In fact, if you're watching this on video, you'll notice I've been in 3 completely different locations for all 3 of these conversations. But when I think back to our first conversation, which was much longer ago for us right now as we're recording, the big thing that I think about is, even though this is a sensitive, tough conversation, it is a conversation to be had. But we were just saying, like, just because something is uncomfortable doesn't mean it should be avoided.
Absolutely.
So it's embracing opportunity and taking the time to recognize and realize where our kids are. And obviously we are called to teach and train and to guide. And so there's no reason not to give guidance. That's what I think stands out, especially from just getting into the conversation.
And in the first and second episode for me, I would say much the same as we challenged ourselves originally, and as we challenge you, and hopefully we do in more than just these episodes, but we should be considering why we are doing what we're doing. And it's not good enough to say because that's what we've always done. Unless that's a biblical reason, of course. We're not challenging biblical authority there, because in that case, yes, do it because it's always been done as it was written, as it should be. But otherwise, if the reason to not do it is simply because we haven't done it, we should be careful of that. We should be very aware of that. I also want to point out that, again, this is not a conversation that is just unique unto us. This is a conversation, the use of some measure of sex education in Christian schools is one which has received attention at the university level, at the research level, and it is something to consider. And so in this third final episode, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be offering up Matt's school, the school that he is the administrator of, and the school in which I'm able to serve part-time, which happens to also be the school I first served in and the school I graduated from, as a case study, and have a discussion about the way in which the school approached sex ed in its high school this year. So to get right to it, the very first step was we had the conversation. We said, is this something that the leadership of Faith Baptist School would wish to incorporate into the curriculum of the health class of the high school? And it was approached that way because of personal recognitions of myself and others who walk the same path as the students who are in the school, and saying, would there have been some difference in the way that my peers reacted to certain conversations and misunderstandings that I heard of and perhaps had, around this topic, and also again, as we noted, just the scaffolding issue of having so many conversations around sex, but not actually having the definition of sex presented to us. So for all of those things, it was brought up to the leadership that perhaps this is something that Faith Baptist School would want to consider. And I suppose at the same time, asking the question, is it something that was already being done? And Matt, to your knowledge, it wasn't, right?
Right. Outside of, and I think I said this in the second episode, of like, there are chapters in biology and health where you're touching on the subject, but not taking a point blank attack at it. This year for our school, our theme was live his truth. And the
Mm,
purpose for that was, we're constantly hearing from culture, live your truth. And so because of that, you get the sayings, don't judge, I'm going to live this way, and it's fine. You should be okay with it. But there was a really interesting opportunity I had in high school where we had an elective course called family living and went through all kinds of, it was really very practical. I mean,
mhm,
all the way from budgeting to, you know, placing, putting the place setting at a table, like
mm,
even cooking a meal, but
yep,
all kinds of stuff. But my pastor came in and did some like marriage counseling, uh, which was, awkward in some ways, but I think that's as close as I got in high school to having a conversation about sex. And,
mhm,
and even then it didn't get very close to it. So, now when technology and information is at the fingertips of our students, I know they're talking about things. I know they're making innuendos, whether they are aware of what they mean or they're not, because they're parrots. So whatever's trending on TikTok or Instagram or
mhm.
whatever else, they're sharing all this stuff. And I know my secondary principal and I have said it several times. Are they aware of what they're talking about?
Yeah.
But we
Mhm.
hadn't taken the time to say, are we purposefully having that conversation? And so that's where we got to this year.
Yeah, and in these conversations, did the clinical definition of sex ever come about? Or were consequences of sexual acts discussed and biological matters surrounding sex discussed? Again, without that, I'll go back to it again, the scaffolding being present of the
Right.
definition of sex. So a driving force for me, and one that I know I brought up in those conversations early on, as I was challenged with this question in on alternative contexts, and hopefully we ask this question of ourselves often: should a graduating senior of Faith Baptist School be able to say honestly, because they'll say whatever they want. I mean, they'll say, I don't know what a noun is when they're in their senior year. Like, yeah, I know you know what a noun is. Don't be that way. But should they truthfully be able to say, I walked away from high school and I didn't know what sex was?
Hmm.
I was never presented with a clear definition of what sex was.
Yeah.
Do we want that to be a sticking point? Not that we go around trying to find the sticking points and then plug them all, but still at the same time, like, do we want that to be able to be said? Is
Yeah.
that
It, and I think it's also important that I've heard graduates say things like, "Oh, I never learned about this, or I never talked about that," when I know I talked about it like every other
sure?
week in, a certain class
Yes.
or something. Like,
Hmm.
that being said, but that's where I think it's important to say, can they truthfully say, where
Yes.
if it's being said, we can't do anything but agree, yes, you would not have
Hmm.
ever had that opportunity. Um, that's and we definitely don't want that when it is such a big life topic that they are going to be facing at some point.
Again, I go back to some of the driving force behind this for me over, just the collection of years to this point, included conversations amongst peers who went and had, I don't want to say perverted conversations, because it was more just a conversation from a lack of understanding. But
Yeah.
that lack of understanding actually wound up affecting the generations behind them because it was passed down, or, questions to
Y-
answers they had. And again, we're not saying, and please don't think that we're solely putting the creation of this seminar totally on the back of the issue of students coming away with misinformation. No, but it's a stick to add to the fire. It's another argument for why,
Yeah.
that students walking away from students not having the proper information at some point can be problematic. And I say that as a
Really?
conservative politic who would
Yeah.
otherwise in these in other situations say, no, I don't want you making students aware of various things
Sure.
that students should, they should be pure of that in their minds. Even as graduating students, I would say they should still be pure of that in their minds. So I hear and I feel eyes on me. I feel the thoughts and the comments coming back. I hear that, but again, we're stacking the arguments here, and no, we aren't going to address certain pieces of
Yeah.
immorality, um, like our public school peers or perhaps others would go ahead and address from certain ages through certain ages. That's not what we're talking about, and we'll get to our actual how we went about doing this and, with what
Hmm.
age and all that kind of stuff in a little bit. But that is again a stackable argument, so to speak.
Yeah. I think a lot of it too. You mentioned by not having this conversation, and it's a bit of that forbidden fruit syndrome, right? Where we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about it. Well, that's exactly what I want to talk about. Just like when you tell your 3-year-old don't touch the oven, and they have no other context other than mom just told me not to touch that. That's the only thing I want to do right now. Yeah.
It was a big deal for the leadership at Faith Baptist School to include their parents,
Yeah.
include the parent stakeholders. How'd you go about doing that? Where was that decision come from? Because you also had to weigh in your mind the opportunity for them to opt out. We talked about this a little bit before, and this
Yeah.
is a bigger point of our original episode, which we destroyed. But
Yeah. Well, I think what kind of helped with this is we also were in the midst of pursuing accreditation. So we're reviewing everything, all of our
hmm
policies. We're thinking through missionally, why are we doing everything that we do? And, we have at Faith Baptist School, part of our mission is to pursue excellence in Christ and actually to help teach our kids to pursue excellence in life for God's glory. So, in all things, we're to be pursuing excellence. So, when it comes to getting to these sensitive topics, parents are sending their students to our school with the expectation that everything that we are teaching is good and is helping them in their academic and spiritual growth.
hmm
So it would be really odd for me to say, you know what, in history class we're coming up to the bubonic plague, and that could be really traumatizing for some kids. So I think I'm going to send a letter and just say, hey parents, we're going to be talking about the bubonic plague this week, and I know it deals with rats, and some people don't like dealing with rats, and thinking about that kind of thing, the fleas and gross, people dying, bodies in the
hmm
street. So if you would rather your child not be a part of that conversation, just let me know, and I'll have them sit out of class. We wouldn't do that. I mean, granted, maybe you've got a kid that can pass out easily because you're just
Yeah.
talking about things, or they could throw up or
Yeah.
whatever. But
hmm
and you can be sensitive in that way. But we wouldn't automatically create an opportunity for parents to opt out. So I don't want to shut it down. Like if a parent truly like says, "No, I want this conversation with my child. I want to be in complete control of this." I understand that. I respect that. And we value it. And that's what we've been talking about this whole time. Like we
hmm
cannot replace parents. However, it was a precedent I didn't want to establish by saying, okay, now since we're talking about this topic, now you have the opportunity to remove your child from the classroom. I want them to be aware. We know this is a sensitive topic. I wanted Mark, I wanted you to share, what all was going to be discussed in the class, so that there's no surprises. That's my key thing to all my teachers. No surprises. We don't want parents surprised, because even if it's a good thing and they're caught off guard, it could end poorly. Sharing the information, giving it well enough ahead of time and I was really careful how we were going to say this. If you have questions or concerns, talk to us, because if it did get to that point, I would want to ensure that the students did get the information. So I'd be having Mark send home the slideshow and the notes to the parent, maybe even before the class happens, so that they can sign off and said, yes, we went through all of this with our child, so that they had the information and it wasn't going to be misinformation from the students, because they missed the class. So it wasn't as if we were not going to let people opt out, but I wanted to communicate it that, it's a conversation we feel ought to happen, and we want to give parents a chance to know about it and respond, if they wanted more clarity.
Sure. I know the secondary principal, she handed out the letter personally. It wasn't that large of a class, so she was able to hand deliver those to the parents. And I believe at times even had a small conversation with them while she was handing it to them. And she overwhelmingly walked away with a sense of thanks.
Yep.
Oh, well, yeah, of course you would, right? We would expect that you would. In fact, she only reported that there was one question, and what was passed out, as Matt noted, was a rather comprehensive understanding of what was going to be covered. So it was a structured conversation that we could then duplicate year over year, and the major notes from the slide sections were what were sent home. And actually, when it came to contraception, there was a question that was raised about, do we want to introduce the students to any kind of contraception outside of abstinence, because then they may think of it as some sort of
an
opportunity. Absolutely. And Dr. Juris went about having the conversation with the parent in a reassuring manner, listening to the parent, reporting that question, and then following up, wanting to make sure that, okay, well, what are we saying? There was a good give and take, but again, it wasn't I'm going to pull my student, or it wasn't I don't want them to hear this. It was, well, how are we dealing with this specific subject matter in that larger discussion? So that was really the sole one, at least the ones who spoke up anyway. But again, having those hand out one by one letters and whatnot, it was a fairly useful review of what the parents were or were not going to say.
If parents don't appreciate your, in a way, going out of your way to communicate with them. I mean, we're not going out of our way, because that's what we should be doing all the time anyway, is communicating what's coming up in the week, or, here's something else that's going on. But especially when we know that this is something that's going to affect home life, it's definitely something parents should be aware of. Like, they should, in theory, always appreciate that. And in my experience, the times where it's not appreciated, when it's last minute, parents aren't given an opportunity to have any say whatsoever. So, there's going to be those kind of things that, or even after the fact, would also be another one. So as long as you're communication is so important. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So what did it look like at the school? And I suppose you could have waited for 2.5 episodes to get to this point. So we'll try to be clear as to exactly what went down. First of all, we should begin with, we did not have this conversation with kindergarten students. which would
Right.
make us different than perhaps what some of you may have been thinking about sex education in Christian schools. Because perhaps as you came up through the system you came up through, or you were a part of a system, or you heard about a certain system, or as was noted in the preparation I did for that health class, but also for this series. If you look up the state of Oregon right now, you look up the state of Maryland, where we are, you will find hopefully what is surprising objectives for health classes that go very low in the age of students, so to speak. This by no means was our intent. If we lost any listeners who just thought of sex ed as they thought of sex ed versus what we are now defining it as, I would understand that getting to this point it was necessary, but we were not looking at sex education anywhere below the high school,
Right. Now,
not below it. It was incorporated into a health class. Now, we're going to talk about what we could do differently in the future, and this might come up again, but it was incorporated into a health class as opposed to being incorporated into a Bible class or a biology class. And one of the reasons for that was because even in, and I'll name the curriculum, even in the Abeka curriculum that was being used for this health class, which began in chapter 1 with sperm meeting egg. Because the first chapter began with the life cycle, we didn't begin immediately with this day discussion. I'm going to call it a seminar from here on out, which kind of clues you in on how we handled this overall. This seminar did not occur in the first week of the health class. This seminar occurred much further into the semester when we were in infectious diseases and speaking of sexually transmitted diseases, when that was brought up in that book. So again, even by this, what would be estimated to be a rather conservative publication, even here, there is an understanding of some a priori knowledge of what would lead to an STD and the life cycle and where life begins and so on and so forth. So we chose to do it in the health class. So it could very well be that others choose to do it in Bible, but for the purposes of the school this past season, it was in the high school health class.
But yeah, a Bible teacher is not necessarily going to be the one to say, well, trust me, I'm the professional. Like, we obviously want to teach the biblical stance, number one, priority number one. But we also want them to understand and trust that what they are being told physically, about all of every detail of it is, it's proven, it's true, it's good for you physically, or it's not good for you physically. And you can take it not just as, well, that's my teacher's opinion. Like, that is truth.
And picking the teacher to do that, it should not go without much thought. Now, this is the pot calling the kettle black to some extent, because I was the one who was doing this, and I'm not saying that I was the one who had the best handle on this. Therefore, we knew early on that I was going to ask my wife to join me in this discussion. And my wife is a nurse practitioner. If you haven't checked out her page, Living Well A to Z, she is a nurse practitioner. She is a primary care physician. She has several thousand patients, and she covers, of course, all sorts of issues with said patients. But one of the main attractions to having her in there for me, as the teacher who prior to that point had been dealing with the life cycle and the menstrual cycle and our bodies and our changing. I mean, you're talking to high schoolers about puberty and our changing bodies, right? Like, we already have established some amount of Dr. Zockoll's going to be saying things that may embarrass us. But in this conversation, we wanted to go past that, and specifically something that walking away I was very thankful for was that, though when it came time to actually read off the definition of what sex was, even though I was the one who did that, the follow-up conversations, the other pieces of sex that were discussed, Andrea was the one who took on. And we walked away saying, I'm very thankful that Andrea was there having those conversations, because certain words, certain terminology, even very practiced science teachers and biology teachers and even health teachers in your school, think about the one who teaches those items in your school, they may not be comfortable utilizing the language that is utilized to have these conversations. I can even imagine stumbling over some of the terms, which would bring, of course, even a little bit more of a level of anxiousness with the students, or
Mhm.
if they were on the verge of laughing anyway, laughing at that point. I was very thankful that when it came to a discussion of the different things that were covered in the rest of the time, she went through them with eyes on the students, utilizing the language as though it was just one of her regular encounters,
Mhm.
appropriately, of course. And that had a value that I didn't recognize until afterwards, and thinking, if I had tried to do this myself, I would have fumbled over some of those and just increased what may have been an anxious situation, or may have been a um, awkward situation to some extent. Whereas for her, it wasn't. And even things, a student asked a question at the end talking about getting AIDS from a toilet seat, and again, when I say the other things we talked about concerning sex, when we covered STDs as a part of it, she was able to. We didn't use pictures. I know that's a scare tactic from other things that Matt said he saw movies, or just heard from other people about what might have been included in other sex education classes. We didn't have any kind of pictures or examples or anything like that. But when it came time to discuss AIDS or an STD, she was able to ap- approach that from the physician standpoint of dealing with this. I don't want to say every day, but dealing with this often enough that it's just factually reported. And the answer was given to the question factually. So you do want to be careful as to who's
Yep.
offering this, because the person themselves, if they can't be trusted, that may be well enough of if you couldn't find somebody on your staff or within your stakeholders to do this in a trustworthy manner, yeah, stay away from it. Don't do it. So
Yeah.
so we will say that too. I'll also mention this. It was a smaller class of students. When I say small, I know that's relative to smaller listeners, but it was sub 20 students. And so the decision was made to not split up the boys and the girls. And it was actually, especially, there was a lot more girls than boys. In this case, it could have been even more difficult to have the conversation with such a small number of, in this case, it would have been a small number of boys in a limited setting.
Well,
And
and
to,
the beauty of doing that, though, it whether you decide, well, we want to be able to get into more detail whenever we're just talking with girls or we're just talking with guys, but again, my mind goes to what inevitably is going to happen after those two separate conversations happen. They come together and they go, "Well, what was yours about? What was yours about?"
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's where you're setting it up for perhaps some misinformation being spread around. Whereas when they're all in that same classroom, there's not going to be well, that's not what was said. This was what was said, as much. Granted, there still could be, um, but that is kind of the nice thing of having that co-ed situation where everybody's hearing the same information. It's pretty much cut and dry, start time, end time. Sure, there may be discussions afterwards, but it's not going to be, well, what was said.
Exactly. Speaking about what was said, this is what was actually discussed. The entire seminar was entitled God's Plan for Sex. It was kept within the confines of a usual class time. It was not something that was split up throughout the year. It was not something that was revisited over and over and over again. It was dealt with as what would have been a lesson of the book, so to speak. So God's Plan for Sex. We began with sexuality is designed for covenant marriage. Covenant commitment, which is marriage. Sexual purity is a call for holiness. Sexuality reflects a deeper spiritual reality. So we began with biblical principles. The next major point is, what is sex? We provided the definition of the sexual act from the Oxford English Dictionary. Moved on to sexually transmitted diseases and infections. And again, this is where Andrea came up and she walked through some of those diseases and infections. She pulled up some CDC statistics about them, risk factors. And again, having her discuss risk factors, behavioral risk factors, biological risk factors, it came off, as Matt was talking about, as someone who was trustworthy in the discussion. And that made a big difference. I appreciated that more than I realized I was going to appreciate that. So she also discussed symptoms of STDs. Contraception was discussed, but we do want to, again, pause here and note how it was discussed. God made sex the means to procreate, to have children. This is fundamental to all of the following discussions. Um, birth control methods. How does birth control work? And then God's plans revisited. Now, just to make a note on the fourth, again, we understand that there may be pastoral staff, or there may be school leadership that would have a different approach to contraception than what was provided there at the school. Again, we're promoting that you have the conversation amongst the leadership to decide if this is a course you wish to take. We're not saying that this is the course that everybody would take
No.
and would adhere to. We're presenting in this case study what it is that we did. And and before Matt jumps in, I'll just note that we did have God's plan revisited, those same first slide, and where we ended the discussion, or at least where we ended the presentation of the seminar before we move to student questions. I'll go over those in a minute, but Matt, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just on the point of contraception, because again, we could very well believe that no one should ever attempt to stay the
The hand of
purpose of
God.
sexual
Sure.
intercourse. And
Mhm.
yeah, we're manipulating whatever you want to say. We could take that position. But what's going to happen? The students are going to graduate, they're going to go off, and they're going to be speaking to physicians, they're going to be going to stores, they're going to be having conversations with their future spouses. And if they've never had that conversation and they don't know what's there, then they're going to be making decisions perhaps without taking even that foundational truth that we talk to them about in school. They can't apply it because that conversation hadn't been had. So you need to be aware this is a proper understanding of it, a proper definition, so that you are making wise choices, informed choices. And don't forget, as Mark was just saying, are you making the decision that brings God honor and glory first of all? Because that's still where you need to start.
Mhm.
Start there, and then you're using this other information to inform
And
you.
and to your point, again, even in the curriculum provided, that was something being done with STDs anyway.
Right.
STDs were being reviewed. We're not then expecting that the students go out and perform the STD.
Yeah.
We're introducing them to it. So exactly, to the point. But again, hear us.
Yep.
Not trying to get on anybody's bad side here.
Nope.
We're trying to present what was presented there. We're not.
This was
Stating.
this is what caused us to do it the way we did it. Yeah.
Mhm. So what wrapped up the seminar was a Q&A time. And this was prompted with me at the start of the class saying, I'm going to pass out these 3x5 cards. And all the students had out in front of them was 3x5 card and a pen. That was it. And we said to them at the end of at the end of the time of delivery of the unit, so to speak, of the instruction, I will be collecting all of these sheets of paper. Doesn't matter if they're written on or not. I'm going to take them all up. And if there's a question on them, Dr. Zockoll and I, the other Dr. Zockoll and I, will be reviewing these questions, and if we deem them appropriate to read off to you and to respond to, we will do so. Of course, allowing ourselves the opportunity to make sure that everybody who wanted to ask a question, and they were anonymous. We said, do not put your names on them. We only would want to see a question. That's all you had. If you wanted to ask a question, just a question. So we were able to make sure that they were anonymous. By collecting all of them, shuffling them, and looking through them, we were able to filter them. Not that actually none of them, and surprise, surprise, for those who might be concerned with this, none of them were inappropriate. Most of them were just blank. None of the questions were inappropriate. I would say one of the questions may have been somebody writing something down just to write something down because the student kind of felt like they were supposed to write something down to please us. but outside of that, there really was nothing that was asked that was inappropriate at all. I already mentioned one was the STD from a toilet seat. Another question that came up was, I thought this was very interesting. Basically, is it okay for an engaged couple to have sex? And what had just been said, it was almost as though they wrote that question before we came to well, I don't know, because we said the same thing we said in the first slide, that sex outside the confines of marriage, of course, is not God's plan. Period. End of story. And so whenever it was they missed that in the first slide, or the first time it was gone through, it was again, nailed in the second time in the back end.
Mhm.
So it gave us a third opportunity to say it, that no, there is no time at which the sexual act is appropriate outside of marriage. So that was another one of the questions that came up. And again, maybe worst case scenario, that was some kid just trying to get a rise out of us.
Yeah,
Some
right.
kid just trying to get us to answer something. Okay, but it allowed us to state very clearly again exactly what we would say God would have us to say in that moment. So if there was anything, I should also say there was a visit by Dr. Juris into the classroom. So if I was thinking about the
Yeah.
environment, Dr. Juris made sure that there was no other class that would be interrupting us during that time. That the doors were shut, so that not because we didn't want, well, in part because we didn't want some of the terminology going outside the doors, but also because we just wanted to keep it private in that situation. So there was a further step than just any sort of usual class would have in making sure that that was a good place for instruction.
Yeah.
Um, she also presented a third adult in the room, so it wasn't just me, and it wasn't just my wife and I. There was a third adult in the room to further offer any sort of support to the parents who would want to ask questions, or knowing that there could be questions to come up later on. There was a third adult in the room who was able to
Yeah.
hear, and she was there for 3/4 of the time. She
Yeah.
came in and out of her own classroom. So,
And I think that's extremely valuable when you have a non-instructor being in there, just to be that extra witness, so that, let's just again go down the road of worst case scenario. All the kids band together and say, no matter what is said in this class, we're going to make it look like
hmm
this was just absolutely terrible, and they want us to all go out and do immoral things.
hmm
And so having that third adult, or even a parent like that, like we if parents wanted to be in that classroom, they were welcome to. It
absolutely,
was, nobody
absolutely,
took us up on that. But even, having a parent in there would also be valuable, because you have that when something is brought up, or something's being questioned, you can go to that third person and say, was this said? Was
hmm
this done? And they can affirm or whatever.
absolutely. As far as what transpired after that, really, not a lot of anything, to be honest. There was a meeting I had with Dr. Juris to make sure that she had no questions for me, that she felt what was she heard was appropriate, and she affirmed that it was, and that it was a useful time spent. I think later on she did hear back from a parent who said that there was a student who came home with a question that was quite obviously a misunderstanding of what was said. So again, not perfect,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it started a conversation, and she was able to weigh in on that conversation, which was great.
Yes, it was definitely one of those telephone type things. Their child heard it from another child who heard it from another child, that was in the class. And we, even to say, like, perhaps the statement made was a facetious one or something to that effect, that then got, just spirals out of control. But, you know, when brought to our attention, when the immediate response is, well, that's not what I heard, or that's not what they said was said. Like, Dr. Juris could easily say, I was there.
mhm,
I heard it. This is definitely what was said.
mhm.
So that was the end of it.
Sure. And I don't want to leave it on that one parent's one question cast a pall over all the rest,
No.
because actually, one of the families that Andrea and I know well, church attendees with us, reached out to us with Thanksgiving. Reached out to us and said, "Thank you so much. I really appreciate you, Dr. Zockoll, Andrea, taking the time to come in and to provide your knowledge with the students. That's useful, but also, very pointedly, thank you for having not difficult, but thank you for having what could be an awkward discussion with them, because that shows to me that you care about them." So
Yep.
that was their response, and others were quiet, but there weren't pitchforks and torches at midnight.
Yeah, even that one that we brought up, which, in this case was our worst case scenario, but it also wasn't you never should have had this conversation. It
hmm
was, hey, this could be concerning if it's true, and I want to make sure it's not, which it wasn't.
Sure.
So it
Mhm.
was it was it was fine.
Matt, I brought up a couple of these already, but walking away, would you have done anything differently?
I will say one thing to be really careful about is don't create the situation based on the current population, the current enrollment. Try to find a thing that, is kind of regardless of personalities. Like you want to create that policy of this is something that we can do consistently. We can be consistent in
Yes.
this way. And if you're saying, "Oh, we have that one family that likes to talk or whatever, so maybe we should do it a little differently." You're potentially only creating more problems than you are solving them. So be consistent no matter what you do. And when we decided to do it this way, this was something that I felt no matter what our situation is, what our settings are, this is going to be able to be done. And granted, maybe Mark and Andrea aren't necessarily going to be the ones, but we live in a community, our church and school, we have so many medical professionals
Mhm.
at our beck and call. So, if it's not going to be them, we are going to have a medical professional make sure that they are there to discuss these things. I think that's valuable, and communicating with the parents the way we did, I wouldn't change that. It's just there really isn't, and I don't want to say that it's because we're so perfect and we did it amazing, but
Such a great
I can't
job. It
think of
was the
a
best.
way, at least right now, unless our listeners start pouring in all the information. It's like, oh no, there's way better ways of doing this.
Mhm.
I for our setting, for our school, and everything that we do, this fits us to a T. It fits our mission. It fits what we are trying to accomplish. It's a purposeful move that gives us opportunity to have that conversation with our students that by and large they appreciate. They are very thankful that we are willing to have these conversations with them.
Mhm. I would note that perhaps with larger classes, the splitting up of the boys and the girls could be a step taken. Would there have been a larger class? Would that have been a desire? It wasn't a desire, and it wasn't a maturity issue for us to consider that to be necessary. In fact, it was rather appreciated. It was appreciated from leadership. They stay together for this,
Yeah.
and because the level of discussion, as was noted by me walking through the slideshow, it wasn't as though we said all the nitty gritty details earlier. It wasn't as though there were too many nitty gritty details gotten into. There were definitely definitions they may not have heard of before and terms they hadn't seen before, just as there would be
Sure.
again when they got to the STD part of the book. But nothing that was carelessly vivid. I'll put it that way. Yeah.
I
So
would say if you're going to if I were to take this a step further, I think have the conversation the way we had it, and then you go into a divided, because there are definitely things that guys are going to struggle with in this area that's different than what girls are going to struggle with
mhm,
in this area. And girls they may need more detail, and they're not wanting to ask that question in a co-ed environment. So
mhm,
so there is going to be value perhaps as a follow-up to go separate ways. But
sure.
I still come back to that in the discussion we're having, keeping everybody together so that it's we know the information that needs to be given has been received by all.
Mhm. And the other consideration, again, these are considerations. We're not castigating the choices that were made. These considerations of, even as Matt just brought up, perhaps this would be done in tandem with a biblical discussion of purity. So
Yeah.
maybe that would be if there is going to be a senior high, maybe a chapel, or maybe just the Bible class the next day, or the Bible class that week, if there was going to be a time when pure, because there's definitely schools out there that have a purity week, or they have
Yeah.
a chapel annually, or they have a time when their Bible class is going to be looking at purity. Perhaps this is something that you would surreptitiously fall in line with that. Oh, what, look, we have the same discussion in Bible, or a similar discussion of what the Bible says about this. Now we're going into it a little bit more. Oh, maybe there's an opportunity for that. If it didn't line up that way, though, it doesn't take away from the fact that the leadership at the school believed it was appropriate to have this discussion with the students stand alone anyway. So,
Yeah.
so there you go. All
There it
right.
is.
Well, Yeah, give us the vitriol, or give us the compliment, or give us your commentary, whatever it happens to be. Let us know what your thoughts are. We'd love to hear back from you. And tonight we are going to be having in our Christian Administrator Spotlight Ms. Erin Gohl. Now, Miss Erin Gohl, and forgive me, Ms. Gohl, if it's Gall, I apologize for that. But Matt's going to pray for you in a second. But Miss Erin Gohl is the principal of Aletheia Christian Academy. And Aletheia Christian Academy is a small Christian school in Holdingford, Minnesota, one of the Max member schools. We are excited for her under the leadership of the church that oversees Aletheia. So, Erin, thank you so much for your your leadership there. And Matt is going to pray for you now.
All right, let's pray. Lord, we thank you so much for Erin and the leadership that she is, the position that she's taken on there in Holdingford. I pray, Lord, that you would strengthen her, give her time to rest. I know the summertime is a busy time where preparations are being made for the next school year. I know this is also a time where many schools are on the lookout for teachers, and I just pray that you would give her the faculty, the staff that she needs to help Alethea be strong for the next school year. I pray for her just spiritually to be refreshed and encouraged throughout the summertime as well, so that she can serve you in the best way that you would have her do for the ministry there in Minnesota. We love you, Lord. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right, folks, it's been a long one, but thank you for growing with us today.
Before you go, please be sure to hit that follow button on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Also, on Spotify, be sure to tap the star icon near the top and select the number of stars you'd like to give us. We'd be so grateful for 5. On Apple Podcasts, scroll down to the ratings and review section and then tap write a review to share your thoughts of the podcast. Thank you.
This is the third and final episode of our sexual education. Don't like saying sexual. That's not. Welcome to the third and final episode of our Sex Ed in Christian School series. Again, thank you for staying with us. We value you. You'll learn something. Don't want to say that either. Just don't like it. Just to make it, keep it short. Keep it short. Welcome to the third episode of our Sex in...
There's a reason we don't do
man.
this too late at night.
We used to. It's so much fun. We probably have more fun. Welcome to the third episode of our Sex Ed in Christian Schools series. This is the last one, folks. Hope you've learned something so far. I still don't like that last part. That is horrible. It's just our last. Welcome to the third and final episode of our Sex Ed in Christian Schools series. There's got to be one more thing to say.
Last time we promised.
That's good. That's good. Let's go.